Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the MMA Girl Podcast with your host, the MMA Girl, me, Jess. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for tuning back into my podcast. We're coming off of an exciting weekend with UFC Kansas City, rolling into UFC Des Moines, which is, of course, Saturday with the headlining main event, Sandhagen versus Figueiredo. So I'm excited to talk about that. Of course, we're going to start off with a rundown and reaction to UFC Kansas City, then go into my predictions and preview of this Saturday's card, and then go over some of the fresh, hot news on the block from the MMA world and the UFC universe. So let's get into it. Right, so the prelim card started off extremely exciting and set the tone for the whole night. And as I said to you guys last week, there were a couple of fights that I was looking out for. The new fighters coming out of Dana White's Contend Series, or some fighters we were coming to see come back to a prelim card, see what they're made of now. I'm going to be talking to you about the fights that made the highlight reels for UFC Kansas City's prelim card. And that was as I said, the first 4 fights. So we started off with Chelsea Chandler versus Justin Edwards. The fight ended just under 3 minutes of the first round. Justin Edwards obviously has been at the UFC since 2021, but this is her first KO victory and her first round finish of her career at the UFC. And it was insane, incredible, amazing to see, and an amazing start to the card. Next one, we had Timothy Kawamba versus Roberto Romero, which again finished in a KO victory for Timothy Kawamba in the second round, just under 4 minutes of the second round. It was an insane KO. I was so excited to see that, and I'm excited to see what Timothy Kawamba will be able to do once he gets back into the octagon at the UFC. He'll be called back very soon, I'm sure. Next up, we had Jacqueline Amorin, a more experienced, very tough fighter in the women's strawweight division. And she, of course, won her fight in the second round via submission against Poliana Viana. A great win for Jacqueline, and great to see her win via submission, which I know she's best at. So it was great to see. And the last insane KO came from Malcolm Wellmaker, who I told you guys last week to watch out for, because he's coming off of Dana White's Contender Series, and he was looking very good at Dana White's Contender Series, if I say so myself. And last weekend, he was able to produce an amazing KO against his opponent, Cameron Saman, who was at the back end of a really nasty KO loss. Wellmaker will definitely be coming back, and something we need to know about Wellmaker is that he was also working a day job, and he quit his day job as soon as he got the $50,000 bonus for his knockout. And I'm so excited when that sort of thing happens, because of course you hear some sort of the stories like Mighty Mouse had explained, that there's obviously a point in your career when you can quit your day job and fully commit to training and getting fights and winning fights and getting bonuses and making money that's, enough to not have to work a day job. And that's what us fans can only wish that our favorite fighters get the opportunity to do. And most guys on the roster, especially those that are in the top 15 of each category, obviously are only fighters and don't have a day job. But some guys, like this guy, who is of course coming from Dana White's Contender Series, so he did not have any background in big promotions where he was able to make big money. So this is now his opportunity to start making big money and make a huge impact in the bantamweight division. And I'm so excited to see what Wellmaker will be able to do in his next fight, and I'm sure that we'll be seeing him on a main card very, very soon. So those were the main highlights from the prelim card that I wanted to talk to you guys about. So let's get into the juicy nitty gritty of this main card, because it was quite interesting to say the least, honestly. I predicted that Aliskerov would win his fight in the first bout of the main card against Muniz, and he did indeed win his fight in amazing fashion in the first round, very hardcore. And I first thought that he would at least get over the first round without getting in a KO, but Muniz didn't even last one round with Aliskerov. It was all go from the get-go. Aliskerov is that kind of fighter. He'll go in with so much confidence and just bulldoze you. Of course, against Robert Whittaker, that didn't work out for him. Robert Whittaker was able to counter again and again and get the KO in the first round, whereas Muniz, unfortunately, was just overwhelmed by that kind of hardcore, ready to go, action-packed kind of fighter. So Aliskerov, congratulations for your win. Got back into win column in the most amazing fashion, and I'm excited to see what Aliskerov will be able to do in the middleweight division, because even though he got slept by Robert Whittaker, that's not a reason to say that he would be not getting up into a higher ranking position in the middleweight division. I think he'll be getting somewhere and his career is going somewhere, just not yet. But maybe from now he'll be able to get some bigger opportunities. Again, I got it right for this one. I got quite a few of these right, so I'm quite satisfied with my predictions from last week's video. Randy Brown versus Dalby. Of course, Randy Brown showed us why Randy Brown is who he is. What an amazing KO victory against Dalby. It happened in the second round via KO. It was just beautiful, and that's the sort of action that we expect from a Randy Brown. He has got so much potential in the welterweight division. He reminds me of Buckley in the sense that they're both very much jacked, scary fighters, and Randy Brown was very much taller than Dalby, but sometimes your height can be working at your disadvantage. But this time his height did not at all work at his disadvantage, and it just was beautifully done. And I'm very excited to see what Randy Brown's got next for him in his career, because apart from a loss against Brian Battle, Randy Brown will definitely be a top 10 contender in the welterweight division, and he's getting better and better. He's very young. A lot of these fighters will get a few losses in the start of their careers, or when they're coming up into facing well-ranked opponents. So very excited to see what's next for Randy Brown. A result that I didn't predict, of course, in the middleweight division, Michel Pereira versus Magomedov. I do not think Michel would lose via decision against a Magomedov. No takedown attempts from Michel Pereira, only from Magomedov. Magomedov made one successful takedown out of the 4 attempts that he'd made. And, he just scraped the victory. It was not, of course, a domination where Michel got no strikes at all, but he just didn't get enough strikes and enough jabs and didn't try to take his opponent down to get the victory. So it was a close victory for Magomedov, but he was well deserved in his victory. Next up, we had Shigedez versus Onama. I predicted that Onama would get the victory in the second or the first round. Unfortunately, he didn't get the finish. He got a decision. The difference that was made, obviously, in this fight were the takedown attempts that were successful in the fight. 3 takedown attempts, 3 takedowns in this fight from Onama, no takedown attempts from Shigedez, and that's what made the difference for him in this fight. Not total domination, but of course it was a close one, but the takedowns made the difference. The co-main event, of course, was between Ming Yang from China and Anthony Smith from, of course, America, who was having his last fight before ending his career. And we got, of course, at the end of the fight, a nice farewell reel of all his best moments from his UFC career, which unfortunately didn't end well because Anthony Smith lost in the first round by brutally getting KO'd by Ming Yang. I did predict that Ming Yang would put to sleep Anthony Smith, because Ming Yang is a very dangerous fighter, and Anthony Smith said himself he wouldn't have wanted to go out against someone who was an easy opponent. He didn't want an easy fight for his last fight. That's not what fighting's about. Choosing your last opponent to be easy so you go off in a nice highlight reel does not fit well with that sort of situation. So Anthony Smith, I respect entirely his decision to go out with a real bang and have a real explosive opponent, but his opponent just slaughtered him. Unfortunate to see Anthony lose so quickly in the first round, but most of the action happened after the fight, because of course, if you guys noticed, Anthony Smith was flipping off someone who was in the crowd, and he almost got into a fight with him if it wasn't for the security that broke them up. Obviously, the man that was in the crowd had no intention of fighting Anthony Smith, so I don't think he even moved from his chair. But Anthony Smith was flipping him off and showing him that he wasn't enjoying any of the stuff that he was yelling at him. He must have been a heckler that was saying things that weren't very nice and maybe flipping off Anthony Smith in return. And coming off of a loss at that very moment, and seeing as he'd finished his career at that very moment, I don't think that's the sort of response he wanted from the crowd, even though a lot of people would argue that Anthony Smith should not have fought again if it was to finish in that fashion, but that's his decision only. So it was hard to see him go out that way, and obviously hard to see him get into that sort of altercation before seeing the highlight reel from his career and the best moments from his career. But I'm happy to see that he has a bright future ahead of him in commentating. So I'm very happy for him that he's still going to be in the UFC, and we're still going to see him very often. Good luck to Anthony Smith on his future ventures, in any case. And for the main event of the evening, we had, of course, Ian Machado Garry versus Carlos Prates from the Fighting Nerds. I'm not going to be my last on because, of course, Carlos Prates lost. First loss at the UFC, now with 7 defeats on his record, 21 victories. And Ian Garry has now 16 victories on his record, with 1 defeat, of course, against Shavkat. This fight, of course, didn't meet up to any of the expectations that the fans had coming into this fight. Coming from the ever violent Carlos Prates, we expected more violence. We expected a finish. We expected that even if you and Garry won this fight, I personally expected Carlos Prates to push him to the limit of violence, for example, and get a knockout from being obliged to retaliate with violence. But unfortunately, I feel like both fighters played it safe. And Ian Machado Garry was, of course, not looking to knock out his opponent, as most people saw. There were a few moments where he could have completely gone in with the ground and pound and finished Carlos Prates. Maybe he knew that Carlos Prates was going to be able to defend that kind of ground and pound, but he didn't try it. So there were some moments where you think, you know, he could have probably won the bout without having to go to the decision. And Carlos Prates the same. There are a few moments where Carlos could have won the fight. Apparently, Carlos said that he was about to finish Ian Machado Garry when he looked up and saw Ian's son was crying, and that he didn't want to obliterate his father in front of him. Now, if that's true, then albeit that could be a reason why you don't want to obliterate your opponent if you see their child in the crowd crying, but he should not have been distracted by that. He should not have said that that was the reason why he didn't obliterate his opponent. This is the fight game. Ian Machado Garry has signed up for this, as you have Carlos Prates, so don't take into consideration if his son's in the crowd. But that's my opinion. So that's the end of UFC Kansas City. Kansas City is in the books. We're just going to go over what could be next for these fighters in their respective divisions. First and foremost is Ikram Aliskerov. He's, of course, a middleweight fighter who just won by KO, of course. I think that putting him up against Robert Whittaker was of course, it was a last-minute decision because Chimaev pulled out, but it was just too much for him to begin with. I would love to see Aliskerov face, for example, Brendan Allen or Paulo Costa. I think those guys would be a great challenge for Aliskerov, and I think that he wouldn't be short of having a chance in either of those fights to win. So I'd like to see how he'd be able to face one of those guys in the top 10 and potentially take their spot in the top 10. For Randy Brown, of course, I think there are a lot of choices in the welterweight division for Randy Brown. Again, I'd love to see him against a top 15 opponent. Potentially a Michael Page, Carlos Prates, maybe that could be an option, or a Jeff Neal. I'd love to see him against one of those top 15 ranked welterweight opponents, but I think all of those guys are really cool, so I think any of them would be a great option for Randy Brown. And he's on a run now, so you've got to give him a top 15 opponent. Let's see what happens next. So Magomedov has just pushed his way into the top 15. He's newly ranked, so he's a top 15 middleweight fighter now because Michel Ferreira has been kicked out of the top 15, unfortunately. So what's next for Magomedov? I think we could put him against a Vettori or a Dolidze, or even, why not a Cannonier? That would be great to see how he'd match up against one of those guys. I think stylistically, they're the kind of opponents in the middleweight division that could offer a good fight, especially against Dolidze. I'd love to see Magomedov versus Dolidze. That's my hot take on that one, and I think that would be a great fight. So what do you guys think for Dolidze versus Magomedov, or who do you think Magomedov should fight next up in the middleweight division? For David Onama, he has now peaked into the top 15 of the featherweight division at number 14, newly ranked, which is a great thing for him, and I'm very happy for him. So I'd love to see him face Youssef Zalal, Dan Ige, or even a Jean Silva. That would be insane. Onama versus Jean Silva, or Onama versus Dan Ige. I'd love to see it happen. So I think those guys would be great opponents for Onama in his next bout at welterweight. Of course, for Ming Yang versus Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith is now obviously retired, but for Ming Yang in the light heavyweight division, there are so many possibilities that for him. He has also pushed into the top 15 of the light heavyweight division at number 14 now, putting Manyfield at number 15 ranked light heavyweight. And I think we should see him face probably a Johnny Walker or a Ozdemir. I think those guys would be great opponents for Ming Yang. Ming Yang is a very dangerous light heavyweight, and I think he's got a bright future ahead of him. So putting him up against a Johnny Walker or an Ozdemir or a Dominic Reyes would be a great opportunity to see how he would bear against someone with a bit more experience at the UFC and a bit more experience against highly ranked light heavyweight fighters. So I'd love to see him face someone like those guys. Who would you like to see Ming Yang face next? And of course, with a knockout like that, even though it was against Anthony Smith, not taking anything away from Anthony Smith, but even though it was against Anthony Smith, we saw the likes of Khalil Roundtree beat Anthony Smith and get a title shot afterwards. We saw guys like that have real great opportunities after beating Anthony Smith. So why not? He's now number 14 ranked. in the light heavyweight division. I think he's going to be very dangerous. He's a huge risk for the other fighters in the light heavyweight division. So why not put him up against someone like Johnny Walker or Ozdemir to see how he would wear against someone who has already faced higher ranking opponents in this division. I would love to see it. And of course, for the winner and the loser of the main event, Ian Machado Garry and Carlos Prates in the welterweight division, of course, Ian Machado Garry, I'll speak about this a bit later on. He has announced himself, and it was confirmed later on by Dana White, that he will be the backup fighter for UFC 315, which is happening next month in Montreal, for the, of course, welterweight bout happening in the main event of this card between Bilal Muhammad and Jack Della Maddalena. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that he's going to be fighting next month, but of course, if either guys pull out of the fight, for example, if Jack Della Maddalena pulls out of this fight, Ian Machado Garry has a guaranteed title shot right there, right here, right now. If, however, Bilal Muhammad pulls out of this fight, as we talked about a few weeks ago, Dana White will be stripping Bilal Muhammad from that belt. So this will become a vacant title belt for the welterweight division. Not sure how that's going to work out. If we listen to what Dana White said and he would strip Bilal Muhammad of his belt, this will be a vacant welterweight title bout in Montreal, in Canada, for UFC 315. So either way, Ian Machado Garry has plans for his next few fights. He did say he'd like to fight the winner of next month's welterweight title fight. For example, if either of the guys get injured, of course, the fight will be his. I'm not sure if he'll get a title shot straight away, because Ian Machado Garry is, even though he's come up in the ranks of the welterweight division, he's only 6th in the welterweight division. Sean Brady has earned his spot at number 1. Shavkat has earned his spot at number 2. And Leon Edwards is, of course, falling slowly but surely, but he's still at number 3 in the welterweight division. So even though Leon Edwards won't be considered for a title shot in the near future because he needs to work his way up, the likes of Shavkat, the likes of Sean Brady, they're most likely going to be called up for a title shot after next month's bout, not Ian Garry, unless someone gets injured between the two fighters that are in the main event next month. So I think if we disregard what Ian Machado Garry wants for his next fight, if the winner is, of course, Bilal Muhammad, we'll see him go on to fight Shavkat. Like that was what was planned in December, but of course Bilal got injured and then Shavkat got injured, so when Bilal could fight, we called in Jack Della Maddalena instead of Shavkat. Now, if Ian does get the chance to compete next month, then albeit, but I think for now he should face someone highly ranked in the welterweight division, of course, but not the winner of next month's fight. I see him fighting a Kamaru Usman. I see him fighting a Leon Edwards. Why not? And I see him, for example, fighting Sean Brady, because if Bilal wins next month, I think Shavkat's the first to get a title shot, even though Sean Brady is number 1 in the welterweight division. So why not see Sean Brady versus Ian Machado Garry, or Leon Edwards versus Machado Garry also? Those are the fights that I'd like to see after UFC Kansas City. What do you guys want to see after UFC Kansas City? And let me know what you thought of last Saturday's card. Were you entertained? Did it please you? Was it everything you expected it to be? What could have been changed? What could have been better? Let me know in the comments down below. So now we're going to be going into this week's Saturday card. Obviously, UFC Des Moines. UFC Des Moines is happening on Saturday. And the main event is, of course, Sandhagen versus Figueiredo. Both coming off of losses, both guys looking to get back into the win column. And I cannot wait to see these guys go neck and neck in the bantamweight division. And this is going to be very much of an important fight for these guys. Deiveson Figueiredo is, of course, 5th in the bantamweight division, with Sandhagen being 4th in the bantamweight division. So apart from Petr Yan, which I think Petr Yan was, of course, the next up for a title shot after Sean O'Malley will have his title shot against Merab. Honestly, I think that Merab, if he wins against Sean O'Malley and Petr Yan, the next person that Sandhagen or Figueiredo should fight will be Merab, if they win. So I think that after Merab versus Petr Yan, after Merab versus Sean O'Malley, I'm predicting that Merab will win both those fights, honestly. Petr Yan will be a bigger challenge for Merab than Sean O'Malley, I think. But those guys will lose against Merab, in my opinion. And Merab will then have to face either Sandhagen or Figueiredo, depending on who wins on Saturday night. So this could be a huge fight for both guys. Let's go over the prelim card. One fight that stood out to me was, of course, Thomas Peterson versus Don'Tale Mayes. Don'Tale Mayes, who we've seen quite a few times in the heavyweight division, coming back with 11 victories to 8 defeats, compared to Peterson, who has 9 victories and 3 defeats. Peterson, who notably just beat Kamaru Usman's brother in a heavyweight bout, which went to a decision. But I'm excited to see what the heavyweight bout will give. I love heavyweight bouts on the prelims because we don't know what we're going to get. So I'm excited to see this one. Another fight that I'm excited to see on the prelim card is Ryan Loder versus Azmat Bikoev. On the 25th of August, 2024, Robert Valentin versus Ryan Loder went down, and Ryan Loder went ham on Valentin and KO'd him in the second round. It was total domination from Loder. Valentin wasn't able to get any strikes in there, get much of a chance at all. And I love to see it. Ryan Loder looked really good. So I'm excited to see what Loder will do against Bikoev, who is a great fighter in himself. So look out for the prelim fight between Loder and Bikoev. The last fight on the prelim card, which is obviously something you have to look out for, is because Miesha Tate is making a comeback since 2023. She last won in 2023, and then we never saw her again. So 2 years later, we're seeing Miesha Tate come back against Ayana Santos. So I'm excited to see what Miesha Tate will come back and do against a veteran like Yana Santos. So that's a fight to look out for on the prelim card, and that will be the featured prelim for the UFC Des Moines card. For the main card, we have quite a few bouts. We have 6 fights on the main card this week. First fight we have on the card is Jeremy Stephens versus Mason Jones. Jeremy Stephens is coming back. He's 38 years old, so he's 8 years older than his opponent, Mason Jones. But I think that Jeremy Stephens will be coming back with a victory here. I think he'll get a late stoppage or a decision, and I think that he'll give it his all because he knows his career is on its very tail end. So this is a lightweight bout between Stephens and Jones, and I think that Jeremy will get the win in this fight. What do you guys think? Next up we have Cameron Smotherman versus Siddy. Both guys with great records for now. Smotherman, who has a record of 12 victories to 4 defeats, and Siddy, who has a record of 11 victories to 2 defeats. Smotherman, he came to the UFC at Dana White's Contender Series in 2023. He got smothered in a ground and pound by his opponent, Grigoriou, and he didn't get a contract. He then continued to fight, continued to get wins. He never lost since he lost at Dana White's Contender Series. So they're now giving him a new opportunity because the last fight he won at the UFC was in 2024 in October against Jake Hadley. So he won by unanimous decision, which means that they're now giving him a bout against Siddy, who is from Canada. So let's see what some of them will be able to do against a Siddy from Canada. Siddy from Canada, of course, is coming off of a very nice victory at Dana White's Contender Series where he won by KO in the first round. Unfortunately, he lost his first fight at the UFC when he was in a main card fight. He got a loss from split decision against Tavares, and then he won by split decision against Armfield. He needs to do something to get his position in the UFC secured. Both guys need to secure their position in the UFC. So these guys are going to be trying to get their opponents KO'd as soon as possible. And I think it's going to be an explosive bout, or this may go to a decision. But I think if I were to choose between one guy or the other, I'm going to go for Smotherman. We'll be seeing a KO victory in the second or third round from a Smotherman. Next up, we have Montel Jackson versus Daniel Marcos. Daniel Marcos with no defeats yet with his 17 victories, and Montel Jackson with 14 victories and 2 defeats on his record. I'm going to go with Montel Jackson. I think that Montel Jackson will take Marcos's 0 in this bantamweight bout. I think he'll get a first or second round stoppage, and Jackson will get the victory in the first or second round by a finish. Next up, we have a welterweight bout. Ponzinibbio versus Rodriguez. Daniel Rodriguez, who we've seen many, many, many times in the UFC's welterweight division. He's had several hiatuses. He's had several breaks. He's had several problems in his personal life, etc. So I'm happy to see Daniel Rodriguez back. He has a record of 18 victories to 5 defeats compared to Santiago's 31 victories to 8 defeats. He's a veteran fighter. Both guys at the tail end of their career, both guys 38 years old. I'm going to pick Daniel Rodriguez via decision to win this fight. What do you guys think? In the co-main event, this is a real important fight because the middleweight division is so crazy right now. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but apart from everything that's going on with Duplessis, Chimaev, etc., outside of all of that, we have, of course, Bo Nickel, who is, of course, the young prospect in the middleweight division, who is currently undefeated with 7 victories to 0 defeats. He's going to be facing the newbie, Derida, who just won his last fight against Kevin Holland, and just before that he had a fight against Meerschaft. Both fights he won via submission in the first round for Kevin Holland and in the third round for Meerschaft. Honestly, he's an explosive fighter on the ground, and this is a great matchup. The UFC has really hooked us up with a great fight here because we're looking at 2 guys that grappling wise are some of the best in the division and some of the best in the UFC all together. So this is going to be very nice to see. And this won't be a fight where you've got one guy that's really good on the ground and one guy that's just being controlled and trying to get out of there. You're going to be seeing a lot of rolling around, a lot of movement, just what I call exciting grappling, exciting wrestling. So I'm very excited to see this fight. If I were to pick a winner in this fight, I'm going to go with Bo Nickel still. I think Bo Nickel has what it takes to become the champion of this division. He's just so ruthless and unbeatable. Anyone that's come across Bo Nickel has not managed to get the win in there. And I think that Derida, despite him being a very, very dangerous fighter, I think Bo Nickel will show us what he's made of. Bo Nickel has once obviously said that he wanted to show us his full range of skills in MMA. He's not just a wrestler, he's a striker. He's obviously a college wrestler who wants to show us that he's good on the feet as well as good on the ground. So I'm excited to see what Bo Nickel will be able to do in this fight. And I think this will finish in a submission in the late rounds of this fight. So second or third round submission from Bo Nickel, or as I think will be most likely, a decision for Bo Nickel. We'll see how that goes out. What do you guys think will happen between these 2 amazing grapplers? Who will come out victorious from this bout? And last but not least, we have, of course, the main event, the bantamweight bout between Sandhagen and Figueiredo. This one's a really hard one to call. I honestly don't know who will win this fight. Both guys are very dangerous. Both guys are very experienced. On the one hand, you have Davidson Figueiredo, who has touched gold, has been up against the best of them, who is 37 years old currently. And on the other hand, you have Sandhagen, which for me is the kind of guy that is dangerous in this division, has always been a top 10 or top 5 contender in the bantamweight division. I just think Figueiredo has just more in the bank for a Sandhagen. Against a Sandhagen, it's not an easy fight for either guys, but I think Figueiredo will get the win here. Hopefully it won't be a decision. I think that the finish will happen in the 3rd, 4th or 5th round, but I think that Figueiredo will try and get a submission in there, but I think it will end with a TKO victory via ground and pound for Figueiredo. That's my prediction for this fight. Either way, as I said to you before, the winner of this fight will be in contention for a title shot after Merab faces, of course, Sean O'Malley and Peter Yan. So this fight is very important for both guys. I think that we're going to see Figueiredo come home with the victory and eventually get a title shot against Merab. That's my opinion. What do you guys think of UFC Des Moines? Do you think that Figueiredo will come home with the victory? Do you think Bo Nickel will come home with victory? And what do you think of my other predictions for this fight card? Let me know in the comments down below. Okay, so as usual, at the end of my podcast, I'm going to be going over the latest news and all the juicy gossip that's coming out of the MMA world and the UFC universe currently. So first of all, I wanted to touch on a bit about Dustin Poirier. Of course, as you guys know, Dustin Poirier is going to be having his last fight on the 18th of July at UFC 316 for the BMF belt against Max Holloway. This is the perfect way to send off a diamond like Dustin Poirier. I honestly think he's one of my favorite fighters, most humble yet confident, charismatic guys that have entered the UFC octagon with a 15-year tenure at the UFC so far. And he recently came out saying that originally he thought he was going to be fighting Gaethje, and that's the fight he wanted for his send-out fight before retiring. But the UFC have other plans for Gaethje. I think that might mean that Gaethje might be getting a title shot in the near future against Makhachev or the future lightweight champion. But in any case, I know that the UFC will have other plans for Gaethje, who is also at the tail end of his career. So maybe a fight against a retiring Dustin Poirier is not the best option for Justin Gaethje right now. So I get it. Max Holloway is the best option for Dustin Poirier. We're going to get a Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier 3 for the BMF title, and I'm just so excited to see it. He went on to Ariel Helwani's show, and Dustin Poirier said that he would especially love if Lil Wayne would accompany him to the octagon for this last fight. Of course, Lil Wayne coming from New Orleans as well. This would be great if both Louisiana guys came out, Lil Wayne singing Drop the World, next to a diamond Dustin Poirier for his last fight. That kind of moment will go down, if it happens, of course, will go down in UFC history as one of the best moments in UFC history to date, and I would just love to see it. So I can't wait. What do you guys think of that fight? Is it for you a great way to send off Dustin Poirier, or would you have liked to see him against someone else? I'm very happy to see him against Max Holloway, and I think that putting it up for the BMF title as well, putting the BMF title on the line is just amazing, because if Max wins, of course, he retains his BMF title belt and gets the first victory against Dustin Poirier. But if Dustin Poirier wins this fight, the BMF belt will be vacant, so that will lead into a great fight for the BMF title, to be potentially putting Charles Oliveira back in the BMF picture, but also going off on a victory against Max Holloway with the belt around his waist is just so satisfying for Dustin Poirier, who is retiring. That would just be the most amazing send-off for him. And as we found out recently, that's not the only big news in his life currently, because of course he announced the fight against Max Holloway last week, but he also announced early this week that he is expecting his second child with his wife. I think it's just a perfect timing, because she'll be giving a birth, I think, end of this year. He's having his last fight in July. It's just, the way chronologically this is happening, going out for him, for Dustin Poirier, is just perfect. So I'm very excited to see that, very happy for him, and can't wait for July 18th. Next up, big announcement. I will often talk about Karate Combat on this channel, on this podcast, because I love Karate Combat's events, and they are free currently, still free to watch on YouTube. And as I said, they're now available on UFC Fight Pass if you missed any of their previous events or want to watch Friday night's event, because Friday night there is a Karate Combat event in Dubai, so it'll be happening a bit earlier on, I think, for you guys in the States, but for me in France, I'm going to be quite happy to see the fights happening at a reasonable time compared to what it usually happens. But fight to note, Arman Tsarukyan is going to be facing Zainakov, who you guys might know. This is going to be a submission pit match, so grappling only. As you know, Tsarukyan's a very big grappler, a very good grappler, so I can't wait to see him come back. Tsarukyan, he has not fought in a while, because of course he pulled out of his bout against Islam Makhachev. In the meantime, if you guys missed out on seeing Tsarukyan, then go ahead and tune into Karate Combat's Friday night event happening in Dubai, live on YouTube, live on UFC Fight Pass, against Zainakov, who is none other than UFC legend Khabib's student. He is in Khabib's camp. He is no one to be stepped on. So this is going to be something very important, because this is not only going to be the precursor for an eventual Islam Makhachev versus Tsarukyan fight. So this is going to be quite a contentious fight. We may see Khabib in Zainakov's corner. No word on that yet. I wouldn't be surprised, because of course it's happening in Dubai, so I don't think Khabib would mind going over to Dubai to support Zainakov against Tsarukyan. We may even see Islam Makhachev in his corner as well. Who knows? We have no word on that at all. But anyway, Tsarukyan is going to be fighting in a submission pit match on Friday against Zainakov at Karate Combat in Dubai. So tune into that on YouTube or on UFC Fight Pass. Chui Vassa recently was doing a tour of a few podcasts that I watch currently, and he believes that the heavyweight division is at the moment quite boring, and he plans on coming back only in January, because he's having a little sabbatical for a year. He's taken a break. He's been able to work on his medical marijuana business as well as his beer brewing company in Australia, and he brought his medical marijuana business to the US. So of course he's touring the US to see how that's going down currently. But as many of you might have seen, Chui Vassa has put on a lot of weight. He's 300 pounds plus easily, and he's at about 135 kilos at the moment. So that's what he said to Ariel Helwani. But he knows that obviously he's having a great time. He's living his life, making money, dealing with his businesses, and he'll be back in the octagon early 2025, potentially in January. But he came out to say that most of the heavyweight fighters at the moment, apart from John Jones and Tom Aspinall, are rubbish, and he thinks that it's the best off that he waits for some new guys to come into the heavyweight division and potentially put him up against a new exciting prospect. As he was saying on the Jackson podcast, when he talked to Rampage Jackson about the situation, he said that he wouldn't mind being up against a new up and coming heavyweight fighter because he's on a losing streak that has lasted for a few years now. So getting back into the win column is the best option for him. And I think if they put him up against a new prospect and that Bam Bam is able to come back stronger than ever, that would be a great opportunity for him to get back into the win column. I'd love to see him against potentially a guy like Taliesin Texera, who is tearing up every one of his opponents so far at the UFC, and he tore up his opponent at the UFC's Middleweight Contender Series. So putting him up against a Bam Bam Vassa, maybe signing Vassa's coffin, or maybe with the experience Vassa has against some very high-ranked heavyweight opponents, that might be the wake-up call that Taliesin needs to not be too confident yet. Who knows? But that's just a suggestion. But anyway, are you excited to see Bam Bam coming back? I personally want him to see him come back. I'm excited to see Bam Bam. And if he's doing well, then that's all that matters to me. But as a fan, of course, I want to see him back in the octagon. So as we spoke about last week, UFC Atlanta, which is happening on the 14th of June, is shaping up very nicely. We, of course, obviously saw the announcement that Joaquin Buckley will be facing the legend himself in the welterweight division, Kamaru Usman. And that will be the main event over 5 rounds, a 5-round main event bout. And we have been announced that Maverick is going to be taking on none other than Rose Namajunas in the co-main event. So Rose Namajunas is coming back. We last saw Rose Namajunas lose against Erin Blanchfield, UFC Fight Night 246. And she was coming off of 2 victories by unanimous decision. I saw personally Rose Namajunas fight in the flesh at UFC Paris 2, where she unfortunately broke her finger and lost against Manon Fiorot. I'm excited to see Rose come back. UFC Atlanta on the 14th of June is shaping up very nicely. Lots of fights been announced recently, so I'm really excited for what's next for the UFC. And next month is going to be exciting. June's going to be so exciting. July is just insane. Every month there's going to be something to talk about. I don't know if you guys follow any of the PFL news recently. I do and I don't. That depends on what news comes out. But I do mostly watch all of PFL's events just to keep up to date with possibly any fighters that are going to be coming to the UFC after their success at the PFL, or some fighters that have been cut from the UFC that are now making their debuts happen in PFL. Notably, I don't know if you guys pay attention to any of the French fighters. Taylor Lapillus was cut from the UFC recently. He then came out saying, it wasn't me being cut from the UFC. My contract just ran out and I chose to look at different options to see where the money was better. And so that's why he signed with PFL apparently. So we're going to be seeing Taylor Lapillus come back on the 23rd of May in Paris at the Accor Arena, where UFC Paris goes down every year. Now, someone else is going to be making their debut at PFL at the Accor Arena in Paris on the 24th of May. And that person is none other than Patrice Evra. Yes, you heard me correctly. Patrice Evra, the legendary footballer, is making his PFL debut as an amateur MMA fighter. And that just blew my mind when I saw that. It just goes to show how the MMA world is evolving. He's going to be facing someone, we don't know yet who. He was seen calling Khabib, asking to come and train with Khabib. And he said, brother, if you want me to train you how to smash people, come down and I'll show you how to smash people like I do. Now, if he goes and trains with Khabib, that's great for him. I don't know how much training Patrice Evra has done yet, but if he's making his amateur debut next month, I think he's not just started training this month. I think it's been quite a big build up to announce this fight. Now, what I wanted to say about that, however, it just goes to show, no offense to PFL, of course, I watch most of their events. I like the company. Of course, I'm a huge UFC fan. My favorite company in the MMA world is, of course, the UFC, if you haven't noticed. But it just goes to show those kinds of gimmick fights, those kind of, celeb fights, the money makers, they're not what UFC are interested in doing. Obviously, the idea of getting an amateur fight on a card at a UFC event is just not possible. There are no amateur fighters coming to the UFC with an amateur record, staying amateur, and then passing it onto a pro record afterwards. That has not happened ever. But Patrice Evra is someone who, of course, may or may not have some success in the MMA world. I wish him all the best, but it's just someone that would never have signed with the UFC, would never have attempted getting signed by the UFC, would never have been signed to the UFC. And the UFC don't do these kinds of gimmick fights, these kind of money makers, these kind of joke fights, if I were to say it myself. I'm not saying that Patrice Evra is a joke. I'm not saying that this is a joke fight. I'm just saying that what I love about the UFC is that we're able to only see purely a company who promotes the beauty of the craft and the skills in MMA, and not the purely money-making, dollar-making decisions. Of course, every company like the UFC, as we talked about a few times in this podcast, must make decisions that will make money. That's just a must, of course. But they prioritize, of course, putting fighters up against each other because the matchmakers know what they're doing. Outside the UFC, of course, there are some promotions like the PFL that prioritize money-making fights, prioritize huge fights, like, for example, I was not going to talk about this, but I talked about last week, the strongman battle that happened on Saturday night just after UFC's Kansas City card terminated, with KSW hosting a one-off one fight contract deal between Eddie Hall and another strongman. Eddie Hall won that fight. Those kinds of fights, those kinds of things wouldn't happen at the UFC. And I like that, because at least for us MMA fans, if you want to watch a fun, jokey fight, then we can go to some of these promotions and watch those fights. And they're just as important for the world of MMA, without obviously saying they're very important, because I wouldn't be saying that if it wasn't for the fact that the UFC prioritized better MMA and good fights. I'm just saying that UFC have always put forward the professionalism of the sport, and they would not water down their brand with those kinds of fights. But we need the promotions for those kinds of fights, because if they're known for those kinds of fights, then why not? It's just that for me, the UFC, I'm just really happy that they don't do those kinds of fights, if I'm honest with you guys. But anyway, I'm going to be tuning in. Patrice Evra, he's going to be in France, where he belongs, and he's going to be fighting on the 23rd of May. Why not watch that? You know, I'm not going to go to see it, but I'll watch it on the TV, and I'll tune in just to see how that goes down. I'll tune in to see how Taylor Lapidus fares up against his new opponent at the Echo Arena at PFL Paris. I can't wait to see it. That's my opinion anyway. So what do you guys think of all that? Did you guys watch Eddie Hall demolish his opponent on Saturday night? Did you guys tune in? Did you not care to tune in? Did you want to tune in but weren't able to? Did you see the highlight reels? Not hard to catch because it was only 30 seconds of a fight. But did you guys see the highlight reels of KSW's gimmick fight with Eddie Hall and the other strongman? Or did you see any of the announcements made for Patrice Evra coming to PFL? What do you guys think of all that? A few bits of bobs to talk about before ending this podcast. I wanted to touch up on Islam Makhachev and Chui Poirier. There are no obviously news on a future announcement on that fight. We know that that Dana White is hinting that a fight for UFC 317 at International Fight will be announced, because he has confirmed, as well as both coaches of both opponents, that Dricus du Plessis and Chimaev will be fighting, but just not at UFC 317. That's fine. Now, the question is, what is going to be happening at UFC 317? Are we getting a bout between Islam Makhachev and Chui Poirier? I think it's looking more and more likely that we are, but I think everything, as I said last week, depends on what happens next month between Bilal Muhammad and Jack Della Maddalena. Anyway, that being said, Islam Makhachev has officially announced that he's entering a fight camp, as well as Chui Poirier, who announced that last week that he's also entered his fight camp. So whatever happens in the next couple of months, I think both guys know that either way they have to enter in a fight camp, because if Jack Della Maddalena loses against Bilal, I think Islam versus Chui Poirier is the only fight to make. If, however, that Jack Della Maddalena wins against Bilal Muhammad, we'll be seeing a vacated UFC lightweight title being put on the line between Chui Poirier and someone else. So I think that in any case, and obviously Islam facing Jack Della Maddalena for the title. So in any case, these guys have both entered camps for a good cause, but we don't know exactly what that cause is yet. So we will be seeing what's happening next. Dana, of course, with his smirk on his face, said, we'll see. There might be a fight being announced soon. We don't know. So I'm faithful that in the near future, we'll be hearing what's going to be happening. But I think we're going to have to wait another month at least to see what happens between Bilal and Jack. Last thing I wanted to talk about is the situation in the UFC's middleweight division. There was a lot of back and forth last week regarding Dricus du Plessis versus Chimaev, of course. As I touched on, it's not happening at UFC 317 anymore. It was never announced for UFC 317, actually. But everyone obviously saying that UFC 317 was missing their main event got on the high horse and said that it's going to be Chimaev versus du Plessis. However, that was not announced ever. And du Plessis announcing, or the announcement being made that du Plessis has been injured, put in jeopardy a fight that was never announced. Now, Caio Borralho, if you guys saw on social media, thinking that the Chimaev du Plessis fight was just signed for and wasn't announced yet, said to himself, this is my opportunity to ask Dana, ask Hunter to replace my du Plessis with myself. However, Caio Borralho was speaking way too quickly because the fight between du Plessis and Chimaev was never announced. And as du Plessis said in his Instagram earlier that day, guys, I've never myself said I'm injured. Whether I'm injured or not, the fight for UFC 317 wasn't announced. I'm definitely fighting Chimaev, but it's not going to be happening at UFC 317. And the fight's not cancelled because the fight was never announced. That being said, I completely understand Caio Borralho, who, of course, wanted to get in there early to propose himself as a backup fighter for that fight. That's great. But as we know, in previous weeks, he has called out a few times the number one ranked UFC middleweight contender, Nassourdine Imavov, from Paris and trains in Paris. Now, he, of course, Nassourdine refused a fight against Caio Borralho for reasons that we don't know. Maybe because he thinks he's number one contender, so he doesn't need to have another number one contender's fight. But nobody said that his fight against Israel Adesanya, which ended obviously with a second round KO for Nassourdine, nobody said that winning that fight meant that Nassourdine was the number one contender, even though he is number one ranked contender of the UFC middleweight division. Of course, that's an obvious one. But a next title shot was not promised to Nassourdine if he won that fight. So I think that naturally he should have another fight before he gets a title shot. And because the next fight that we know is going to happen is Chimaev du Plessis, why not in the meantime fight a Caio Borralho to secure your place at the top? Maybe it's because Nassourdine's scared that he'll lose his place at the top, or maybe he was just hoping to wait it out until Chimaev and du Plessis have it out between each other to determine the middleweight champion and then have a fight for the belt. I don't know what's going on in Nassourdine's head, but apparently he's now reconsidering a fight against Caio Borralho. So a fight between Caio and Imavov is looking more and more likely to happen. I'd love to see that at UFC 317. I think if Islam versus Poirier is announced for UFC 317, why not as a co-main event Caio Borralho versus Nassourdine Imavov for the number one contender spot for a next title shot for the middleweight belt? Why not do that? That would be just insane. We've not seen Caio Borralho fight in quite a while. He is being strategically put on the bench to wait it out to see who he will be able to compete against next. And why not, as he said himself, against Nassourdine? And Nassourdine has a lot to prove now because we're waiting to see what his response will be. So I'm excited to see this fight if it happens. I hope it happens. What do you guys think of the state of the middleweight division currently? I think the middleweight division, the featherweight division, and the lightweight division, those three divisions are really spicy. All the divisions are spicy, honestly, but it depends on the period. Right now, the lightweight division is on fire. The middleweight division is also on fire, and the featherweight division is also on fire. So those kinds of divisions, when they heat up like that, the fights are just so juicy. The fights are just so important. So what do you guys think of the situation in middleweight? Like I said, what do you think of the situation between Poirier and Islam? Do you think both guys entering their camp means that they're going to be fighting each other at UFC 317 or later on? And do you think Caio Borralho and Imavov in the middleweight division are going to be facing off for the number one contender spot? Or do you think Nassourdine will just wait it out to see what happens between Chimaev and the current champion, du Plessis? That's all I have for you guys. That's all the latest news and MMA updates in the UFC universe and the MMA world. I hope you guys enjoyed episode 11 of my podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments down below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And tune in next week for episode 12, where we go down the rabbit hole of UFC Des Moines. And of course, we'll be breaking down next Saturday's card and all the latest news as usual. See you next time. Bye.